The fourth technique of breakthrough copy: redefinition. How to remove objections to your product. Time and time again, you're going to have to sell a product that has built-in handicaps. That, along with its promises and its functions, also has certain aspects to it that actually repel the prospect. No product, of course, is perfect. If only for the reason that he must pay money for what you have to sell, your prospect starts with a basic minimum of resistance against buying your product. But this resistance is intensified by certain drawbacks in some products, often to the point where, unless you take definite action in your ad to redefine them, these drawbacks will actually kill your sale. Let us now look at the three general categories of drawback and then at the three types of redefinition that eliminate them. First, of course, there is the product that is, or that sounds too complicated, too hard to use. Second, there is the product that is not important enough, whose basic appeal doesn't have a statistically broad enough market. And third, there is the product that just costs too much. Its price is so much above the price of other products in its class that people simply turn away when it's mentioned. It's amazing how many products fall into one or all of these categories. Fortunately, the same mechanism, redefinition, helps you deal with all three. Redefinition is the process of giving a new definition to your product. It says that the product is this rather than that. Its objective is to remove a roadblock to your sale, if possible, before the prospect even knows it exists. Perhaps the classic case of redefinition is that of Lifebuoy soap in the 30s. Lifebuoy was a good soap that did a good cleaning job, but it had one overwhelming drawback: a horrible medicinal odor. Since the odor couldn't be removed without removing the cleaning power, the problem became one of redefinition. Put simply, how do we change this odor from a liability into an asset? The answer, of course, was the famous BO campaign. The prospect's attention was focused on the odor of his own body, an odor which he was told would drive away people, and which does. He was then told this odor must be eradicated, not with an ordinary soap, which was not powerful enough to do the job, but with a soap with the odor-destroying power to make a longshoreman acceptable at a society ball. Lifebuoy was this super powerful soap, and the overwhelming proof that you could smell the moment you opened the wrapper was the strong medicinal odor built into every cake. This is the simplest and often the most effective kind of redefinition. A simple concept judo, a complete reversal, turning a liability into an asset with a single idea. Wherever you can use this flip-flop method, do so. But most problems of redefinition are more complicated, and demand more complicated means of dealing with them, using many of the devices we have just examined in the process of gradualization. Let us now turn to these devices and see how they can present an entirely different image of the product to the prospect than you would have imagined had you not thought them through beforehand. First, simplification. Our first category is the overcomplicated product, the product that sounds too hard. To see how to replace this image with a more favorable one, let's look again at the television repair book ad that we discussed in the last chapter. As you remember, the original ad for this product failed because it promised, "Do your own TV repairs" in its headline. This was considered too difficult by the average set owner, even though the ad said, "It's easy, it's simple, it's quick" in the next paragraph. Therefore, since the ad confronted the prospect with the fact that he would have to make repairs before it made those repairs easy and simple and quick, he simply turned the page and tuned the ad out. The second ad did not discuss repairs. It discussed breakdowns and expenses. And as we have seen, it spent its first several paragraphs showing that these breakdowns and expenses did not have to occur at all, if the sets were given the proper care. Up to this point, the ad has talked about the prospect's world and compared it with a far more promising world where expert care produces trouble-free TV viewing. Now the two worlds must be joined through the product. This joining is called by the pitchman the turn. It is a transition of great delicacy. It must be accomplished without a jar. In this ad, it begins in this paragraph. And most important, these experts have discovered that you do not have to be a handyman or a mechanic in order to coax this performance out of your set. Here's why. We have already seen how the repetition, these experts have discovered, and the paragraph parallelism tie this statement into the stream of belief that has been built up before it. Now, however, we are going to look at this same paragraph from another point of view, to see how it provides the first step in eliminating any fear of making your own repairs. Notice, of course, that the very fear of the average owner that he is not a repairman is here brought out in the open, specifically stated, but now framed as a promise. Notice too that there is no mention of the word repair at this point. It is still too early at this point. Though the average owner might be willing to accept the idea that he could coax better performance out of his set, it would still be too much to ask him to believe that he could make repairs on that set at this point. This leads to the final step. The ad must now redefine what the reader thinks of when he hears the word repairs. It must now lay a new foundation of feet, showing that almost all the repairs the owner will have to make are actually only minor external adjustments. It now proceeds to do this in the following 3 paragraphs, which we have already studied in the last chapter, and which we will now look at again to see the second process of persuasion redefinition, which is also occurring in them. Here are the paragraphs again. 5 minutes a week for perfect reception. These TV experts have discovered that your TV set is a great deal like your body in this respect, that it gives you warning signals before it has a major breakdown. For instance, after your set was installed, it probably played perfectly for the first week. But then, it began to suffer from the vibration, the jarring, the interference of other electrical appliances in your home. The picture might suddenly begin to flop over or flicker. Lines may appear on your screen. Now, and this is important, if you had the knowledge to quickly make a few minor adjustments on the outside controls of your set, then you could correct those symptoms. You could keep that set playing perfectly, and you could prevent major breakdowns in exactly the same way they were prevented in these manufacturers' tests. If you do not have this knowledge, if you do not make these adjustments, then your set will weaken. You will get a consistently bad picture, and you will have to call a repairman. Now, what occurs in these 4 paragraphs is actually a redefinition of the term repairs in the reader's mind. This is done in 3 separate but integrated ways. 1, by immediately comparing the television set to the human body, and therefore minor maladjustments in the set to warning signals given off by the body before it becomes seriously ill. By making this comparison, the copy relates the intricate, technical working of a television set to something as commonplace and familiar as the running nose that warns you of an approaching cold. Because of this comparison, some of the mystery of the set is explained away, and the owner gains a new feeling of confidence in dealing with it himself as something he understands. And, at the same time, this comparison distinguishes between the relatively rare major breakdowns and the far more frequent minor maladjustments, which he can now treat himself as easily as he'd take a cold tablet to stop his running nose. 2, by continuously describing these minor maladjustments as warning signals and symptoms rather than breakdowns or repairs. This makes them sound easily corrected, before real trouble, which might require technical skill and complicated tools, can develop out of them. And 3, by stating outright that these minor adjustments can be corrected by making a few minor adjustments on the outside controls of your set. Therefore, repairs are redefined as adjustments. Troubles on the TV screen are redefined as warning signals or symptoms. And repair calls or breakdowns are carefully segregated into the least likely to occur 5% of all possible TV troubles. Therefore, with this redefinition in mind, with this reorganization of facts accomplished by the copy, there is no longer any reason for the average set owner not to make his own minor adjustments, rather than pay a repairman to make them for him. The objective has been accomplished. The ad can now go on to specifically state how much money the owner will save by making these adjustments, and where he can buy the book that tells him how. In exactly the same way, whenever there is a process which is difficult, whenever there is a product which is hard to use or difficult to apply, the copywriter's first task is to simplify that application in his prospect's mind. This holds especially true for new inventions which actually simplify processes which formerly were too difficult for the average prospect. A new breakthrough is not merely accepted because its manufacturer says so. Its claims for ease and simplicity must be proved in the ad, or the reader will simply shrug his shoulders and say, "It's just another copywriter gone wild." Such a situation is one of the most frustrating experiences you can have. Here is a product which you know is far easier to use than anything ever introduced in this field before, because you've used it. But no matter how loud you scream "easy" in your ads, people just seem to ignore you. What do? The answer is twofold. 1. Redefine, as this chapter shows you. 2. Mechanize the new simplicity, as you'll see in the next chapter. Remember, innovation without acceptance is valueless. The more people know that something is difficult, and the more revolutionary and therefore different your product is, the more resistance you will meet from them in accepting it. You must, therefore, lay a base for acceptance by redefining the entire field for them before you bring in your product. Let's look at one more example of such breakthrough advertising and see the solutions the copy offered that made the product a success. One of the great ads of all times, of course, is the Sherwin-Cody ad. Though most advertising men are familiar with the ad, they do not realize that the course itself was a tremendous departure for the times, far easier and simpler than anything else that had gone before. But the prospects for such a course were absolutely convinced that good English was too hard for them. They had tried to learn it before and had failed. Therefore, any new course that could be successfully sold to them would have to redefine English for them, redefine mistakes in English for them, and certainly redefine the process of turning bad English into good English for them. The Cody ad is a masterpiece of gradualization. It should be memorized, not merely studied, by every copywriter. However, within it, in 4 paragraphs, is contained another masterpiece of breakthrough redefinition, from hard to easy with a few simple ideas, that goes like this. Only 15 minutes a day, nor is there very much to learn. In Mr. Cody's years of experimenting, he brought to light some highly astonishing facts about English. For instance, statistics show that a list of 69 words with their repetitions make up more than half of all our speech and letters we write. Obviously, if we could learn to spell, use, and pronounce these words correctly, we would go far toward eliminating incorrect spelling and pronunciation. Similarly, Mr. Cody proved that there were no more than 12 fundamental principles of punctuation. If we mastered these principles, there would be no bugbear of punctuation to hamper us in our writing. Finally, he discovered that 25 typical errors in grammar constitute 9/10 of our everyday mistakes. When one has learned how to avoid these 25 pitfalls, how readily one can obtain the facility of speech which denotes the person of breeding and education. When the study of English is made so simple, it becomes clear that progress can be made in a very short time. No more than 15 minutes a day is required. Thus, the complicated becomes simple. The hard becomes easy. This is the first use of redefinition. Now let's look at the second, escalation. Here you are dealing with a product which works and which is acknowledged to be easy enough to use, but which simply does not have an appeal broad enough to assure it of a mass market. Your job here is to escalate your product, to give it more importance in your prospect's eyes. You do this again by redefinition. You broaden the horizon of benefits of the product. You redefine the role that the product plays in the prospect's life. You widen the area of reward that your product yields to the prospect, showing him that it enters into dozens of vital situations every day, paying off for him where he might least expect it. For example, let's look at another ad for another English course 40 years later. By now, people are not as sensitive to their punctuation or grammar. Now, the negative aspect has lost its appeal. People want good English as a persuasion tool to win over other people. So, good English must cease to be an end in itself. It must be redefined to become instead a means to a more important end, one which is desired by far more people. And since the positive aspect must now be dominant, that part of good English which has the greatest value for persuading people, vocabulary, must now be featured. Here's the ad. Revolutionary new word power machine makes you a master of English overnight. Automatically gives you a power-packed vocabulary to make your ideas crackle with excitement. to hold others spellbound with the power of your speech and your written word. Automatically spots embarrassing errors in grammar, spelling, pronunciation you didn't even know you were making, clears them up at once, frees your mind from worry, lets you feel at ease, gives you the blazing new self-confidence you need to make anybody like you, to win people over irresistibly to your point of view. This approach redefines the benefits of the product, shifting them from a less desirable area to one that will generate more sales appeal. But this use of escalation to increase benefit appeal is only one of the ways it can serve you. Another is to increase the importance of the product, showing that something the prospect wants very much hinges directly upon the performance of your product. For example, in an ad for spark plugs, this fact was pointed out to the reader. Yes, you pay $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for your car, and a single 99-cent part robs you of the real power and enjoyment that car should give you. Or here, in an advertisement for a speed math course. If you want to get ahead fast, if you want a position of real importance and responsibility, then a knowledge of this kind of super fast, super accurate mathematics is an absolute necessity for your future. Or escalation can be used to show the prospect that your product is not something to be put to work just once or twice a week, but that it will be needed and used by him almost every waking minute. Here's how this was done in a single sub-headline in an ad for a course on handling people. Your entire life is spent trying to get others to do what you want, without friction. You must agree with this statement, and therefore you must redefine the importance to yourself of a technique which allows you to accomplish the all-pervading task more easily, more effectively, and more rapidly. This is the second use of redefinition, escalation. Now, let's look at the third, price reduction. Here you have the product which, quite simply, costs too much. Your job is to make that price seem less. You do it by a very simple act of redefinition, like this. Why does the product cost too much? Because it's being compared with other products in the same field. And how do you whittle away psychologically at this price? By switching the comparison and relating it to some other, more expensive standard. For example, here is an enormously successful mail-order ad for spark plugs, which sold for $1.49 each, or 1.5 times the standard for the field, and twice as much as the discount price. Did the copywriter therefore say that they may cost a little more but they're worth every cent of it? Of course not. He made them cheap, and he did it in these 2 paragraphs of psychological redefinition. Up to now, these extraordinary SA fire injectors were practically made by hand and would have to sell for as high as $5 each. But we knew that $30 or $40 was more than the average driver could afford. So we decided to get the price down so low that these injectors would pay for themselves 12 times in 1 year of driving. So here is an astonishing proposition. If you will check your car performance before and after you install your SA fire injector system, and then tell your friends and neighbors about them, here is what I'm prepared to do for you. You can have a set of SA fire injectors for the year and model of your car for only a fraction of their value. If you act now, they are only $1.49 each. Do you see how he does it? Do you see how many times he does it in these 2 short paragraphs? As a last review of redefinition, because its techniques are so important to you, let's just list the individual phrases that build up, again and again, the feeling of value and bargain. Here they are. Did you catch them all? Practically made by hand. Would have to sell for as high as $5 each, $30 or $40. Notice that he repeats the handmade price twice. First he gives it to you per plug, and then for the entire set. Thus, the new comparative price is reinforced. You practically wince at the $40 figure, since you want the plugs by this time. And you're going to feel pretty good when he brings in the now lower figure in the next paragraph. Get the price down so low. Here is the magic word low, now legitimatized in your eyes by the description of the handmade set in the phrases that preceded it. that these injectors would pay for themselves 12 times in 1 year of driving. Not only value, but reward. Not only low-priced, but gas-saving. And again, the comparison to a higher figure. This time, the money you'll save on gas. Astonishing proposition. Now the price becomes so low that the mere statement of it may cause you surprise. It may sound slightly corny as we dissect it here, but it is incredibly effective in the context of the ad. And most of it, perhaps all of it, is never consciously noticed by the prospect. He simply realizes that he feels that a bargain is being offered to him. If you will check your car's performance and tell your friends and neighbors about them, the introduction of a condition, an action you must perform in order to get the now low price. Used before in the last chapter in a different context, here we see how the same device works again to substantiate, with equal power, the feeling of value. Prepared to do, again, the connotation of favor, of allowance, of discount. You can have, not, you can buy. He is letting you have the plugs at the low price. Again, he is doing you a favor. You are getting a bargain. Only $1.49 each, the classic modifier. The 10th bargain phrase in these 2 paragraphs. Notice how similar gradualization and redefinition are. Notice how each operates below the surface of the conscious mind. Gradualization by its structure, by its arrangement of facts and phrases. Redefinition by its rearrangement of perspective. Each is an extremely subtle and powerful way of building belief. Each deserves much more study than we can give it in this course. Let us now turn to some equally powerful but more apparent mechanisms that also build belief. Chapter 11, the 5th technique of breakthrough copy, mechanization. How to verbally prove that your product does what you claim. As we have observed repeatedly, good advertising copy exists simultaneously in 2 different places. Part of that copy is words on a page, or sounds carried by radio waves, or pictures and sounds coming out of a television set. But the other part of that copy, the crucial part, takes place in your prospect's brain. It is the series of reactions, planned reactions and anticipated reactions, that your copy causes in his mind and his emotions. Actually, when your prospect reads your copy, he is engaging in a silent dialogue with you. You are feeding him ideas and images and emotions in a planned pattern, and he is feeding back to you reactions to these ideas and images and emotions. You hope, you plan that these reactions will be favorable, that they will be controlled reactions, that he will see the images you are projecting, that he will understand and agree with the ideas that you are advocating, that he will share the emotions you are suggesting he feels, and even embellish and intensify them. But also, at the same moment, you must be aware of the fact that, included among these reactions, are also a number of inevitable anticipations or demands or questions on his part, and you must answer these questions or your copy will fail. What are these demands he is going to make from time to time on your copy? Basically, they fall into 3 classes. 1. Demands for more information, more image, more desire. You have whetted his appetite, now you've got to satisfy it. He is saying to you, tell me more. Demands for proof. He knows he wants it, now he wants to know that it's true. He is telling you, oh yeah? Who says so? Demands for a mechanism. He knows he wants the end result. Now he wants to know how you're going to give it to him. He is saying, how does it work? To write good copy, you have to play a dual role. At the same time, you have to be copywriter and prospect. You have to develop an almost foolproof sensitivity to these inevitable reactions. You have to know the exact point that they are going to come in. You have to anticipate them. You have to switch copy direction, fill in the wanted material, at the precise point that your prospect loses interest in one theme and demands the other. This is one of the most difficult parts of writing copy, and the exact spot where many good ads break down and lose their prospect. And since such anticipation points occur several times in a single ad, you will find yourself working over the same paragraph of unimportant copy hour after hour. All you know is that at this point something went wrong. At this point your prospect is dissatisfied. We will discuss these problems of copy direction, anticipation points, etc. in Chapter 14 on interweaving. At this point, however, let's look more closely at the third demand, the demand for mechanism. Verbal proof. This is the vital question. How does it work? Your prospect is asking you here to give him a mechanism. He likes what you promise, he wants what you promise, but he has to be convinced that your product can actually give it to him. You have to demonstrate your product, in words, logically, so that he can understand exactly how it gives him the end result you promise. Since the beginning of advertising, of course, the copy that furnishes this information, that provides this mechanism, has been called reason why copy. Claude Hopkins was its master. But there have been few great selling ads of any period that do not use it to convince their prospect that their product actually works. In fact, the basic question you must ask yourself about this device when you sit down to write a piece of copy is not, should I use it? Or should I build a mechanism into this copy? But simply, how much mechanism does this copy need? This, of course, depends, as so many other things in your copy, on the state of awareness of your prospect. Is he familiar with the mechanism by which this product works? Does he accept it? If so, then this part of your job is done for you. Other advertisers have spent their money to make this mechanism familiar to your prospect. Stage 1. Name the mechanism. You may now take advantage of their investment by simply naming the mechanism and going on to beat them with your price or other features. For instance, in the conventional camera ad to back the headline claim, all that you'd have to do is name your mechanisms like this. Take foolproof photos with the Xenophon, 1750 with electronic light setter, push-button Zomar lens, magazine load. Only $135. Here, the three mechanisms which ensure the perfect pictures are simply named and not described at all. The prospect is already familiar with the way they work from the other ads he has seen, and any further detailing of their nuts and bolts would simply bore him. Therefore, you name them in as bold type as possible and go on to compete with your price. Most catalog copy and retail copy needs to assume only this abbreviated form. It deals with products which are already known and whose mechanisms are already understood and accepted. Therefore, any further wordage on these points would only be wasted. But now we come to that vast array of products whose mechanism cannot simply be named. Why? For two basic reasons. Stage 2. Describe the mechanism. Because the prospect doesn't understand their mechanism because everybody else has the same mechanism and the same promise and the same price, and the market is getting tired and you need a new way to compete. Let's look at the simplest case number 1 first. Here your mechanism is not so well known or not known at all, and you can't simply name it. You have to go into more detail, you have to describe it. So you have the classic situation of promise, reason why. You build a strong, quick promise, and then you follow up with the reason why you can deliver that promise. This 1-2 punch of promise and reason why is as old as advertising itself. Here, for instance, is how Rinso used it in 1926. First, they give the promise like this. Who else wants a whiter wash, with no hard work? How would you like to see your wash come out of a simple soaking? Whiter than hours of scrubbing could make it. Millions of women do it every week. They've given up washboards for good. They've freed themselves forever from the hard work and reddened hands of wash day. Now they just soak, rinse, and hang out to dry. In half the time, without a hint of hard rubbing, the wash is on the line, whiter than ever. Notice how the original promise in the headline has been taken and intensified in these first 3 paragraphs of copy. The promise is repeated in different words and from different perspectives over and over again in those first 3 paragraphs. But notice too that as the copy builds desire, it also builds a growing reaction on the part of the woman reading it. This reaction can be expressed in one word: how. This promise sounds better and better. It begins to sound too good to be true. Now she needs reassurance fast. So the whiteness claims stop. The copy shifts direction and now begins to sell the mechanism like this. Dirt floats off, stains gone. The secret is simply Rinso, a mild granulated soap that gives rich, lasting suds even in the hardest water. Just soak the clothes in the creamy Rinso suds, and the dirt and stains float off. Rinse, and the wash is spotless. Even the most soiled parts need only a gentle rub between the fingers to make them snowy. Thus clothes last longer, for there's no hard rubbing against a board. Notice first of all, that this mechanism, the suds that float off dirt, is sold just as hard as the whiteness story it is brought in to prove. The first rule of mechanism copy is that it is not scientific discourse. You must never allow it to become dull or merely factual. You must load it with promise, load it with emotion. Every word in good copy, including mechanism copy, sells. Only in these paragraphs the copy is selling a secondary claim, dirt floating off, that proves the primary claim, a whiter wash. But still, it sells. Secondly, of course, you'll immediately notice how simple the mechanism is in this 1926 copy as compared with the same field today. In those days, it was enough to mention the facts that the suds floated off the dirt. The reader accepted, as an evident truth, the fact that they would do so. Today, of course, in our much more sophisticated and exploited market, she would no longer do so. Today, you would need far more mechanism. You would have to explain more, promise deeper, perhaps even invent a miracle ingredient to do the work for you. Stage 3. Feature the mechanism. Which brings us to case number 2 and the difficult problem of what to do when your market is highly sophisticated. When promises sound alike, when price competition becomes suicidal. This takes us back to Chapter 3, where we discussed market sophistication from another perspective. Here we discovered that mechanism, strong mechanism, saleable mechanism, is not only a way to build belief, but may actually become so important to the success of your product that you must put it into the headline. These headlines are all mechanism headlines. Floats fat right out of your body. First wonder drug for reducing. Run your car without spark plugs. Shrinks hemorrhoids without surgery. Tommy Armour says, smack hell out of the ball with your right hand. And hundreds more. Every one of them offers you a new way to get what you've been wanting. A new way, a new mechanism, a new chance to satisfy your desire, even if everything else you've tried has failed you. Mechanism, therefore, can be inside your ad to prove your main claim or on top of the ad, elevated by the state of your market to becoming the main claim. If people assume that they know how your product works, or if your claim is so new that they don't care, then all the mechanism you need can be summed up in a word or a phrase. If people are not quite sure how it works, describe the mechanism, in selling language, until they have enough reason why to believe you. If you have, however, an exceptionally strong or dramatic mechanism, or if you want to establish definite superiority to other competing products, then sell hell out of that mechanism. We'll see some expert examples of how to do this in our next chapter, on concentration, when we're shown how to compare your product with the rest of your field. On the importance of mechanism when you want to convince your reader that you're giving him a bargain. One of the sad truths of our time and profession is that our readers do not always believe the truth when we tell it to them. Every copywriter has had, at one time or another, a perfectly marvelous product that just couldn't be sold, because people wouldn't believe that it could do what he knew it could do. In the same way, many manufacturers and their agencies are startled when they cut a price, advertise the reduction, and see no increase in sales. What happened? No one believed them. A price cut, like a product advantage, is only as good as your words, and your strategy makes it. Price cuts must be justified. There must be a reason for them, a mechanism behind them. Without such a mechanism, without such a reason why you should give this bargain, you are going to get only a fraction of its real sales power. The great master of price cut mechanization was Robert Collier. His book, The Robert Collier Letter Book, is one of the great classics of copywriting know-how. Here is just one example of how Collier made his price cuts, not only believable, but dramatic. Before the price goes up, dear sir. A short time ago, one of the old reliable mills that makes the finer qualities of woven madras for shirts began sending out SOS calls. They had kept their plant going steadily for months, thinking that the usual demand would easily take care of their excess output, but with the weather so generally unseasonable, the usual demand didn't materialize, and there they were, heavily overstocked and needing money. If we would take all their surplus stock of the finer grades of woven madras, amounting to 250,000 yards, they offered to let us have them at way below any price we had ever paid for shirtings in all our years in business, at far less than they could make the materials and sell them for today. We took them, the whole 250,000 yards, at a tremendous savings in cost. A bargain you may never get again. Let me point out the difference between this logical, carefully prepared introduction to the price slash and a simple, bare announcement of that slash. Here, the copywriter not only emphasizes bargain over and over again, but brings in quality as a counter-desire time after time. He thus uses a mechanism within a mechanism. 1. The unseasonable weather causing 2. The factory to become overstocked, resulting in the primary markdown, to build belief upon belief. Here the copy starts with the mechanism and only goes into the bargain claims 6 paragraphs later. Again, he has taken the creative gamble in this case that he could hold the reader's interest for those 6 paragraphs. And because of this gamble, he reaps 10 times the believability for every word he said about the bargain value of his offer from Chapter 12, the 6th technique of breakthrough copy, concentration. How to destroy alternate ways for your prospect to satisfy his desire. As you know, in the final analysis, no successful copy ever sells a product. It sells a way of satisfying a particular desire, and its power to sell ultimately comes from the intensity of that desire. If the desire is commercial, that is, if it is shared by masses of people, and if each of these people want that satisfaction enough to pay the price required for a mechanism to satisfy it, then it is highly probable that many firms will try to deliver that mechanism or product to them. The almost universal condition of commercial life is competition. No one who sells anything, of course, can avoid it. As you write, one eye is fixed on your market and the other on your competitors. We have described in this course several different ways of beating competition. Let's stop for a moment and review them. First, of course, is superiority of product. This is the ultimate weapon in the war for the consumer's dollar. If you produce the best product, your advertising has 100 times the chance of success than if you produce only a fair product. Most great ads have been associated with great products. Most great copy claims come from the assembly line. If yours does not, if your copy is better than your product, then send it to your client instead of your prospect and tell him to make it a reality. But even the best product needs equally as effective copy to induce people to try it. Otherwise, the excessive cost of getting the first purchase may drive the product off the market before the repeat sales can build up high enough to earn it through. So we come to our second weapon to beat competition, superiority of promise. A stronger promise that evokes more desire. A wider promise that causes more people to buy. A more believable promise that brings in the skeptics as well as the susceptible. This entire course has been a blueprint for developing such promises. Third, we have the weapon of product role. The role the product allows its consumer to play. The personality, the identification, the prestige, the status, the excitement you can bring out of your product or graft onto it. Fourth, we have response and reaction as a competitive force. The ability to one-up the competition, to escalate claims when necessary, to shift mechanisms, to invade new markets. And fifth, the technique we will discuss in this chapter is direct attack. Direct attack, the mechanism of concentration, differs completely from the other four methods we have discussed above. All these techniques have the common element of ignoring the competition. They concentrate on your story, your promises, your benefits, your product. They act as though there is no other way possible of gaining the satisfaction your prospect desires. Therefore, they are most effective when you dominate a field, when your primary problem is to protect your customer's loyalty against the claims of your competitor, or when your story is so powerful, so different, or so fresh, that the competition has nothing to match it. In these cases, it's better not to give him the prestige of attack, not to mention his claims or his product, even invidiously, in the space which costs you such a dear dollar. But in many other cases, especially where your advertising budget is much less than his, especially where the bulk of your prospects are already customers of his, your first problem may be to crack his image, to shatter their loyalty, before you can rechannel their desire around to you. But this process of concentration, this careful, logical, documented process of proving ineffectual other ways of satisfying your prospect's desire, is much more than mere attack. If you can only attack another product without showing at the same time, by comparison, how your product provides what the other lacks, then say nothing at all. Never attack a weakness unless you can provide the solution to that weakness at the same time. The reason for this is simple. Your prospect knows that your attack is biased. If therefore you are attacking another product only for your own good, in other words, to win the sale by disparaging your competitor, what you will probably evoke in his mind is skepticism and dislike and very little else. But, and this is the critical point in this process, if you can show your customer that this attack is for his own good, because your product will eliminate this weakness, then you have a sales story he will accept. Then you will make him question even the most ingrained loyalty. Concentration, therefore, is the process of pointing out weaknesses in the competition, emphasizing their disservice to your prospect, and then proving to him that your product gives him what he wants without them. Notice that all the techniques that we have developed in the last few chapters are used here. Intensification to show the penalties of continuing with the old product. Gradualization to show the logical cause of the weaknesses and how they can now be cured. Mechanization to prove that your product removes the weakness, and so on. Concentration is therefore a complicated process, taking up sizable space to do its job properly, and combining almost every trick you have learned in this course. To see how incredibly effective it can be, however, let us look at two masterful examples. The first is our spark plug ad again. As you remember in the copy, the copywriter has told his prospect that he can run his car without spark plugs, that he can get more gas mileage and more power if he puts fire injectors into his car instead of the old-fashioned plugs. Now he goes on to 1. Provide the mechanisms which prove his own claim, and 2. To destroy the prospect's confidence in plugs forever in this brilliant piece of interweaving copy. Mechanics and engineers, read this carefully. And for you, mechanics and engineers, let me tell you why fire injection must give you these results. A spark plug jumps a spark of electricity across an air gap. This is the most wasteful and power-consuming way to get electricity from one place to another, and it limits the size of the spark. A fire injector fires on the surface of an electrical conductor. This is the most efficient way to get a big, powerful spark into your cylinder. On ordinary spark plugs, the air gap between the electrode and the firing point is always getting bigger because the electrode is always burning away. This means you have misfiring, which means loss of power, plus wasted gas, plus raw gas to damage the cylinders and piston rings. On fire injectors, there is no air gap and no electrode to burn away. That means maximum gas explosion, which means full power, full economy, and no raw gas to wash away the oil protection from cylinder walls and pistons. A spark plug accumulates filth and carbon because of inefficient firing. This means you need regular cleaning, setting, and expensive replacement. A fire injector never needs cleaning or setting. It actually breaks in and becomes more efficient with use. It will actually outlast your car, delivering maximum efficiency without servicing or replacement. A spark plug gives you a thin, skimpy spark that actually blows out under pressure of less than 120 pounds. A fire injector gives you a heavy, powerful flame that will not blow out at pressures far heavier than those created by even the highest compression engine. With ordinary spark plugs, you are using or should be using premium gas, which costs from 4 to 8 cents more than ordinary gas, and despite this, you're getting inefficient, wasteful gas consumption. With fire injectors, regular gas will give you up to 8 more gas miles per gallon, up to 31 more horsepower, plus easier starting in all weather. Add these savings together and see for yourself why I say that fire injectors will pay for themselves every single month that you drive your car. Ordinary spark plugs have to be replaced regularly. In some of the new high-compression cars, a set of plugs will burn up in a couple of months. A fire injector installation is guaranteed for the life of your car without cleaning, servicing, or replacing. These are some of the reasons that the U.S. Air Force pays premium prices for surface-supported injectors for their aircraft, and why you will ultimately find fire injectors in all automobiles. Let's see how he does it. I hope that by now, you have spotted many of the techniques he uses to gain his effects. To build the overall power of this sequence, let's just check off a few of them right now. First, of course, is the interweaving contrast. A weakness in the operation of the spark plug is pointed out, and then immediately counteracted by the benefit the injector gives you. Bad, good, bad, good, bad, good. This is the underlying structure of this sequence. But this is only one use he makes of parallelism. He repeats words to contrast the inherent weakness of the plug with the inherent strength of the injector. A spark plug jumps a spark. A fire injector fires on. Spark is a weak word. Fire is much stronger visually, and he later intensifies this contrast of image by saying, a spark plug gives you a thin, skimpy spark, against a fire injector gives you a heavy, powerful flame. You can picture the difference. Throughout the copy, definition and redefinition take place. Spark firing is the most wasteful and power-consuming way, as opposed to the most efficient way to get a big, powerful spark. Misfiring means loss of power plus, while maximum gas explosion means full power, full economy. Notice the parallel sentence structure here, sharpening the contrast. And in a beautiful image, the fire injector actually breaks in. A masterpiece of redefinition by analogy. Of course, almost every benefit has its documentary mechanism. The air gap in ordinary plugs gets bigger because the electrode is burning away. The spark plug gets dirty because of inefficient firing, and so on. Let me point out again the general structure of this sequence. It is bad, good, bad, good, bad, good, and so on. It thus offers repeated, direct, one-for-one contrast. It explores a number of performance factors of vital interest in the prospect, showing the bad and then the good side of each of them. A second strategy. This is one way of accomplishing your concentration, but of course it is not always feasible, because the points you wish to contrast may not be so easily and clearly broken down one by one. You may be dealing instead with a time sequence, a recurring, unpleasant experience with which the prospect is familiar, and which you wish to sharpen before you provide him with the antidote. In this case, your concentration copy would adopt a different structure. Something that looks more like this. What happens to you now with the product or products you are using presently? What will happen when you switch to the new product? Here is such a structure for an ad selling a reducing pill. Let's look first at the negative copy. For years, doctors have known that ordinary reducing plans that you pay $5, $10, and even $15 for in the stores are completely passive, that they depend strictly on your own willpower, on your ability to starve that fat off your body. All that these ordinary reducing plans are able to give you, for your $5 or $10 or $15, are hunger-appeasing products, pills, powders and liquids that do nothing more than swell up in your stomach, that do nothing more than dull your hunger a little. But not one of these products could do anything to actively help you reduce your weight, to take the strain off that starvation diet, to actually help you burn up that ugly fat, oxidize that fat, melt it away forever. So what happened? If you were overweight, you struggled to do the job of reducing by yourself. You took your hunger-appeasing pills religiously. You pushed away the foods you love. You spent week after week of torture. And finally, if you were lucky, you carved off 5, 10, or even 12 precious pounds. And then your willpower snapped. You broke your terrible diet. You discovered that your little pills were useless to keep you away from the foods you loved. And the fat flowed back, heavier and uglier and more deadly than ever before. Again, let's glance at the means the writer used to get his total effect. In the first and second paragraphs, definitions and redefinition. Ordinary reducing plans are passive. They depend on your own willpower. They can do nothing to actively burn up fat. And in the third paragraph, the equating of taking ordinary reducing pills with doing the job of reducing yourself. Next, logic, cause and effect. Given the acceptance of these definitions by the reader, the third and fourth paragraphs become a logical necessity. This tone of cause and effect is conveyed in the phrase, "So what happened?" Now, of course, the third and fourth paragraphs condense an experience which is all too common to every woman who has ever tried to reduce. She has lived through this herself time after time. She recognizes each of the symptoms. And so she finds herself nodding her head, agreeing with each in its turn, building up a stream of acceptances which carries more and more conviction as she finds her own experiences more and more thoroughly described. And then, at the climax, in the last line of the fourth paragraph, the destruction of the old methods of reducing is complete. There is no doubt that the fat has come back again in this woman's life. If it hadn't, she wouldn't have read this much of the ad, but here the inevitable implication buried in a sentence with which no woman could disagree, it was the failure of the pills that caused the failure of the diet. Thus, the stage is set for the hero product to emerge. It has already been foreshadowed in the second paragraph, in the negative accusations that these ordinary methods can do nothing actively to burn away fat. Now the copy goes on, from failure to promise, like this. And so you tried another passive plan, and another, and another. And then, if you were like the men and women whose fantastic case histories were reported by leading medical journals, perhaps you went to your doctor and asked him for an easy way out, without torture, and without sliding back. These doctors had the answer in a tiny gray pill and a common-sense plan. In their hands, so tiny that they could balance it on the tip of their little finger, was perhaps the greatest weapon ever discovered against deadly excess fat. It was a miraculous compound called lecithin, brand new, whose amazing fat-dissolving properties had been discovered by a Nobel Prize winner, the co-discoverer of insulin. Because this product was perfectly safe, and as easy to take as an aspirin, Maine had used it themselves when they wanted to lose weight. They were not given starvation diets. They never experienced a single hungry moment. They reported, in case after case, that they felt more pep, more energy, more youth and vitality than they had known in years. And then, day after day, faster and easier and safer than they had ever known before, the ugly excess fat around their bodies melted away. While they were eating 3 delicious meals a day, they were shedding as much as 5 pounds a week. While they were feasting on mouth-watering steaks. And so on. Right back into intensification copy with its strong picture-image cell. Here are your contrast, your mechanization, your documentation, your reference to authority, and then your return to promise, in the form of case history, which now has many times its original power, based on both the elimination of alternate channels of fulfillment and the strong supporting mechanism which documents its claims. I have purposely chosen extreme examples to illustrate each mechanism. These copy blocks are longer than concentration need logically be. The same effect may be boiled down into 2 or 3 sentences, or even a single phrase, as in this classic headline, "Shrinks hemorrhoids without surgery." Here is contrast, implied weakness in other products, compensating promise in your own. Again, it is not the content, nor is it the length of copy used in a mechanism that makes it effective. It is simply and solely the problem it solves for you in the development of your copy, by the emotional reaction it produces on your reader when he encounters it. If, in this case, you have caused him to question a habit, shift a loyalty, take a chance on your product. You have done your job, no matter how few or how many words you have used to do it. Chapter 13. The 7th technique of breakthrough copy, camouflage. How to borrow conviction for your copy. We have now discussed 5 separate ways to build believability into your copy. I do not think we should leave this subject without at least mentioning one other, entirely different approach, that of borrowing believability from all the places in our society where it is stored up. The process by which you do this is quite simple. As you know, people do not buy a newspaper or a magazine or any other medium of communication for its ads at all. They buy this publication, or they turn on their radio and television set to keep in touch with the world around them, to learn what's happening and why it's happening, to be entertained or enlightened or simply kept up to date. Now, when a person chooses one of the publications, and for a moment will disregard radio and television, he does so because he believes that that publication is telling him the truth. He has faith in that publication. He believes in it, and as long as he has faith in that publication, as any space buyer can tell you, it remains an excellent medium for advertising, because some of his trust carries over from the editorial pages to the advertising pages. He simply assumes that his publication wouldn't carry the ad if it weren't true. And, on the other hand, when he loses faith in that publication, the effectiveness of its advertising just goes to pieces. If he no longer believes in the publication, he won't believe in the advertising it carries. This factor, the believability in the medium itself, I think is a far more important consideration in buying space than mere circulation. All this is of vital interest to the space buyer, of course, but we have to go a step further. You see, not only does this reader come to believe in the publication which he buys repeatedly, but after a while he becomes used to receiving his truth couched in the style and format and phraseology of that particular publication. In other words, a conditioned reflex has been formed here. The man believes in the publication. The publication phrases its material in a certain way. After a while, that phraseology begins to carry an aura of truth all by itself, no matter what material it embraces. Thus, you have waiting for your ad, if it is adapted the right way, a stored believability, a believability reflex, which you can tap by adopting this particular publication's phraseology when you address its audience. Let's look at a few examples. I'll try to show you the 3 different ways you can borrow this built-up believability. First, of course, and most obvious, is format. Each publication has its own look. You have your copy. Your job is to merge both of them into a combination that will, 1. Allow the reader to enter into your ad with the least possible mental shifting of gears from editorial to advertisement, and 2. Carry along the greatest possible amount of believability through every sentence of the ad. I have not discussed layout in this course, because I do not believe layout is nearly as effective as copy in determining the results of your ad. Here, however, layout is important. A single change in format can add 50% to your readership and your results. Your job here, once again, is to approximate as closely as possible the format of the medium in which you are advertising. This means, ideally, letting them set your ad, using their kind of headline-to-body copy transition, using their illustrations, their subheads, their breakup of space. The second way to borrow believability. The second, slightly less specific, is adopting phraseology. This method stems from the fact that certain media, or classes of media, use certain stereotyped phrases over and over again, which after a while take on a believability of their own. In newspapers, to take the most obvious example, there is usually an issue date, a city of origin, and perhaps a byline. Each of these news indicators may be picked up by the copywriter to add believability to his opening, as in this extremely successful example. Skin Specialist demonstrates how to rinse away your blackheads by Claire Hoffman, New York. A leading doctor today showed an audience of men, women, and skin-troubled teenagers how to clean oily skin and shrink enlarged pores with a 10-minute home medical treatment he has perfected. And so on. The news tone has been set by the opening phrases. The entire remainder of the copy has been given the atmosphere of a report rather than a sales story by these first few sentences. The same principle can be used for each of the other classes of media you employ. In direct mail, look for the key correspondence your prospect receives that are opened instantly without exception. Some examples would be refund checks, government correspondence, dividend notices, confidential reports, high-priced newsletters, etc. In radio and TV, adopt the news format and the news phraseology. Even, if possible, adopt the news sound, the clipped phrase of the newscaster, the insider tone of the analyst, the documentary feel of the news, handheld camera. Study the channels of communication that people believe in. Adopt their tone, their feel, their style, their sincerity. Make your ads blend in so there is no jarring transition. Camouflage them. Believability borrowing strategy number 3. In a later chapter, we'll deal with mood directly. However, as the last method of borrowing believability, I want to mention 2 mood adaptations that rightly belong in this discussion. We've seen that you borrow your publication's format and your publication's phraseology or style. These 2 methods of adding confidence to your copy depend directly on the particular medium you are using at any particular moment. You pick up that publication's appearance and idiom, as it were, because people have come to contrast that editorial manner of presentation with advertising language in general, and because they automatically trust the first and automatically approach the second with an ingrained skepticism. In other words, advertising language, which is a naturally biased language, an emotionally charged language, tends to produce a counter-reaction in its prospects by its very appearance. To overcome this instant and automatic skepticism, besides borrowing our host publication's idiom, we also have 2 other idioms which allow us to escape the hard sell stereotype. The first is understatement, simplicity, a lack of color words, fewer adjectives than the reader would expect or less superlatives, short sentences that fall rather than rise in tone at their end. For example, take any Volkswagen ad, count the number of nouns per sentence, and compare it to the number of adjectives. See how the ad kids itself never takes itself too seriously. Notice how it makes its point quietly and then stops. Even how the extremely short, extremely simple sentence structure adds to the feeling of sincerity. Here is a complete Volkswagen ad which features one superiority of the car over competitive models. Could you have told the story as well, even if you used 10 times as many words? You never run out of air. You also won't have any worries about draining or flushing the radiator in spring. There is no radiator or hoses, or water pump, or rust. And so there are no worries about anti-freeze in the fall or cracked blocks in the winter. If you feel that you owe your Volkswagen engine a little something special every spring and fall, you can do this much. Just run it once around the block and let it air itself out. This is great copy because of its simplicity and its image and its sell, all of which interact to give a very powerful argument to anyone looking for a new car. Also, I'd suggest that you study any of the old Claude Hopkins ads or Johnny Kennedy from the old Lord and Thomas days to get the same power of sincerity without the limiting whimsy. Or the great radio and TV pitches of the 50s. There is little advertising being written this way, and its very rarity makes it even more effective. It will not solve every selling problem, but where it is effective, especially in continuous campaigns, it is very effective indeed. The second mood you may employ to break away from the advertising stereotype is what I call deadly sincerity. This is the technique of leaning over backwards to point out the flaws in an offer so that the benefits, when you bring them in, will be believed that much more deeply. Since this is not done in ordinary advertising, since ordinary copy does not knock its product as well as praise it, it carries great emotional impact, especially in highly competitive fields. Here's an example. For a book on getting ahead on your job, which had to run after 100 books on the same subject had already appeared in the same publication. To the man who will settle for nothing less than the presidency of his firm and who is willing to make the incredible sacrifices necessary to get there in the shortest possible time, here's the most realistic handbook ever written for you, and you alone. This is a private advertisement. It is not meant for 99 men out of every 100. These men do not have the drive, the impossible pride, the absolute compulsion to succeed that this advertisement demands. And so on. You can see immediately in the first few paragraphs of this ad how the tone of utter frankness is set. The use of such non-advertising phraseology as incredible sacrifice, impossible pride, absolute compulsion. This advertisement demand sets the ad off from the others around it. Give it an air of unpredictability that induces the reader to go on. In our next chapter, when we discuss reinforcement, we shall see how this tone of complete fairness and even criticism can make a comparatively minor claim take on immense emotional impact. But for now, it is sufficient to point out that this is one more way to break out of the hard sell stereotype and gain almost the same type of believability that would be given to a factual report. Chapter 14. The Final Touches. Let's now review what we've done up to this point, and the last few problems that we have to consider. We started this course with the idea that there was a definite technique that could produce better headlines than the ones you were using yesterday, and since the headline is so vitally important to the success or failure of your ads, we devoted the first part of our book to this creative search. Then in the second part, we investigated the equally important problem of how to exploit that headline. How to lead the prospect from the feeding of interest and curiosity that your headline had aroused in him into a constantly mounting conviction that this product has what he wants, and that it is absolutely capable of giving it to him. You use body copy to accomplish this second objective. Perhaps a lot of it, perhaps very little. In either case, we've examined the three interlocking paths by which this effective demand is created. First, the intensification of desire. Then, the creation of an acceptable product personality or role with which the prospect will want to identify, and then the rather abstract structure underlying your copy arrangement that produces believability of your story. So now we have seen how to reach out to your prospect's mind on all three emotional levels: desire, identification, and believability. Now, as our last problem, we have to put all these elements together. We have to take all these promises, these images, these devices, these structures, and weave them together into one cohesive unit that holds your prospect's attention from beginning to end. In other words, Having broken down the ad to analyze the elements that make it work, we now have to deal with the reverse problem, tying it together once again. We have several additional devices that help us do this. We have already touched on them in passing in previous chapters. Now let's examine them more closely, see what makes them operate, formalize them into working rules. Like this. Verification, how to offer authorities and proof. Now, of course, comes the most obvious kind of believability copy. Your proof, your statistics, your tests, your testimonials, your authorities, your trends, your documentation, your seals of approval, your awards won. Any fact at all that you can use anywhere in the copy to show that your product does what you say it does. The key words here are anywhere in your copy, because as I have tried to show in the last 4 chapters, the placement of your proof is as important to its overall effect as the content itself. I can't tell you anything about gathering proof that your own research department doesn't know 100 times better. Or, if you have no research department, that good hard digging won't give you. There are no special rules to phrasing proof, except perhaps to keep it as short as possible, as dramatic as possible, as specific as possible. And above all, remember that proof copy, like every other word in your ad, is selling copy. It cannot merely offer proof alone. It must offer the kind of proof that makes the prospect hungry to read every word of it, and it must make him want the product more and more at the end of every line. Fine, but the next question is, where do you place the proof in your ad? At what point or points will it be most effective? And next, how many different proofs or tests or testimonials or what have you, should you include in the ad? When do you put them in, and when, if you ever do, you leave them out? When do they make the ad too heavy? When do they make it dull? When do they make it too much to be believed? We have been discussing these questions, though not in this context, for the last 4 chapters. For the last 4 chapters, we have been discussing the placement and structure of claims, of promises. We have found that the more you prepare for those claims, and the more agreeable you have made your reader to accepting them, the more powerful they become. The same exact rules hold for your proof. Proof, like claims, is most effective when the reader unconsciously demands it, and when he is ready to accept its content as necessary and logical. This is the rule, as simple and concrete as this. All the rest is application. We've gone over, quite carefully, the 4 processes that determine position in your ad. They are, once again, 1. Gradualization, the development of a stream of acceptances from your reader to your statements, leading finally to an inevitable demand on the part of that reader for your product. 2. Redefinition, the removal of preconceived objections on the part of your prospect toward your product by providing him with a new definition of that product. 3. Mechanizations, the verbal proof that your product works, that it does what you say it does. And 4. Concentration, the verbal proof that other alternate products do not do this essential function as well. Now, every one of these processes is effective, not only in increasing the believability of your claims, but also in increasing the believability of your proof. And, in exactly the same way, in every one of these processes, there is a place for your proof to appear where it will do twice as much good for your copy as it would anywhere else. For example, go back and look at the concentration copy in the spark plug ad that we analyzed in Chapter 12. Here was a point-after-point comparison of the weaknesses of spark plugs contrasted with similar strengths in fire injectors. At the end of this sequence, the writer had built up tremendous believability. He could have done many things with that believability. He could have switched it into an immediate restatement of his main claims. He could have channeled it directly into asking for the order. He could have gone into a money-back guarantee, etc. Instead, he chose to pile proof upon believability in this way. These are some of the reasons that the U.S. Air Force pays premium prices for surface-supported injectors for their aircraft, and, in so doing, strengthens the power of both the believability copy that went before and the authority reference that now follows. Thus, and we'll take this up in greater detail in the reinforcement section that follows, in copy 1 + 1 can often equal 10. By adding one powerful piece of copy, at precisely the right moment, to another, you can get an overall effect far greater than these 2 pieces of copy would ever produce, if they were just spread out all over the page. Position increases power. We continue to find new examples of this every time we explore another copy process. And how about the other three processes? How does your proof interact with them? Well, take gradualization. Study the TV repair manual ad again. Notice the exact point that the manufacturer's test rooms are brought into the copy at the very moment that the reader is begging for some sort of solution to the problems that the copy has intensified over and over again. Here, at this point, the reader is searching for an answer. Here, the exact same proof, which might be merely dull statistics if it were presented earlier, suddenly takes on a sharpened drama, because the reader now is fully aware of its importance and is ready to explore every word. Again, I must repeat that the main problem with documentation is that it is inherently dull. Your job, therefore, is to add excitement to it. You have to stage it. You have to develop a drama in your reader's mind into which your documentation enters as the hero, in which statistics suddenly become charged with emotion, because you've made them the solution to whatever stands between your reader and the satisfactions that he craves. I could go on and give examples of the interaction of proof and each of the remaining mechanisms, but I think you would gain far more by doing it yourself. Instead, let me sum up by saying this. Documentation is any sort of proof, statistics, facts, tests, etc., that your product works. Mechanization, on the other hand, in case there may be a confusion in your mind, is the verbal and logical demonstration, and thus also proof, that your product works. Mechanization does not necessarily have to incorporate any outside documentation at all to prove its point. It does this on the strength of its logic and its structure alone. Verification, which is different from both of them, is the process of arranging your documentation within your copy so that it gains the greatest immediate acceptance from your reader and has the greatest emotional effect on him. Thus, I would suggest that you stop thinking of placing your documentation only in the headline of your ad, or in the subhead, or in a separate box labeled, "Here's proof." I would suggest instead that you start thinking of documentation as one more element, along with promises, belief words, momentum builders, image sharpeners, emotion definers, and all the rest, which we'll explore before we finish, to be interwoven together, side by side, so that combined, they give you far greater emotional power and believability than any one of them could separately. Reinforcement, how to make two claims do the work of four. The first rule of all copy, of course, is that it produces an emotional impact. As we have seen over and over again, even in believability copy, even in documentation, every word must carry image, picture, feeling. Now, the wonderful thing about emotional writing, of which copy is one form, is this. If you employ it skillfully, then the impact of one emotion, plus the impact of a second emotion, will often add up, non-mathematically, to the impact of four emotions. In mathematics, 1 plus 1 always equals 2, never more. In emotional writing, 1 plus 1 can often equal 10. In other words, two emotional images, joined together in the right way, can often have 10 times the impact that either of these images has by itself. For example, in the classic Avis campaign, the main theme was, "We try harder," good by itself, but nowhere near as powerful as it became when it was reinforced by the reason why Avis tries harder were only second. These two separate ideas, one, were second, two, therefore we try harder. When they are combined, take on a joint impact far greater than you could ever logically expect if you simply examined each one of them by itself. In fact, we can even define one type of creativity as the ability to combine separate images into a new unit that is much more powerful than the mere logical sum of two parts. This is how new words are born, as well as new phrases, slogans, concepts, ideas, and of course, headlines. Your job, and it's a tough one, is to do just this, image by image, throughout the entire body copy of your ad. For example, in the ad, for the man who will settle for nothing less than the presidency of his firm that we quoted in the last chapter, this sequence occurs. This is John Horn's first book. He's not an accomplished writer, and it has flaws. If you read for style or for literary quality, this is not your book. But there are ideas in this book, whole chapters in this book that were never seen put down on paper before. And this might open doors to you, tomorrow, that otherwise might take a lifetime of waiting for you to walk through. Notice how the startling frankness of the first paragraph, which goes out of its way to call the reader's attention to flaws in its product, serves as an intensifying contrast to the positive claims of the second paragraph, making them far more believable and therefore far more powerful to the reader who is now convinced that he is receiving a fair report on this book. It is the juxtaposition of these two paragraphs, one following right on top of the other, that makes their combination so effective. Copywriting, in many phases, is the search for such juxtapositions. The last 5 chapters have been full of examples of them. I suggest that you go back and read these examples again and underline the combination points and junctures where one claim blends into another and either sharpens it, pours strength into it, or makes it more believable. So one way you tie your ad together is to constantly build one claim on top of another, always seeking to make each stronger and more believable by the combination. This same principle applies in a smaller way in our next device. Interweaving, how to blend emotion, image, and logic into the same sentence. Let me mention at this point a thought that has probably occurred to you several times over the past few chapters. The big trouble with analysis of the kind we've been doing in the second part of this book is that after a while it begins to sound quite mechanical. You've probably thought that I'm suggesting that you abandon any kind of creative flow and work like a sort of phrase carpenter. Here you put in a promise. There you nail on a believability sentence, then cover both of them with a good strong identification. This is what it sounds like because it takes so long to identify each one of these devices and show you how to work them. Because of this need for analysis, which always requires that you cut individual elements out of the life flow of a growing ad, it sounds like you should actually be conscious of each device as you are using it to write that ad, even going so far as to name the device as you weave it in. I don't think I have to tell you that this mechanical approach is not my idea, and that it won't work. What I'm trying to do is exactly the same procedure that a golf pro uses when he wants to improve your game. He doesn't just let you go out and play, he stops you, makes you notice your hands, rationalize your grip, shift your fingers, get used to the new feel of the club as you lift it this new way, and then take a few practice swings, all at the same time that he's telling you why you're doing it this way. When you're swinging for the first few times this new way, you feel pretty awkward and you're conscious of every muscle in your arms. That's why he has you keep swinging, through 1 bucket, 2 buckets, 10 buckets of balls. Pretty soon though, those arm muscles are going to feel comfortable in that new swing, and you're going to lose your conscious awareness of them. At that point, what was mechanical before becomes intuitive now. But it's a new kind of intuition, far more skillful and effective than you had before. This is the kind of intuition I'm trying to build in you. I'm trying to take you from creativity number 1 to creativity number 2. Both are intuitive states, where you write from the full depths of your emotions as well as your mind, and when you are no more conscious of the mechanisms and devices that you are employing to gain your effects than you are of the movements of your fingers on the typewriter keys. But to get you from state number 1 to state number 2, I have to bring all these details to consciousness and make you awkward in a new and more effective way than you were when you first learned to write copy, so that you can take these insights and techniques and bury them inside your own talent, so that you can automatically employ them without thinking about them at all when you want to express most powerfully your ideas, your emotions, and your sales philosophy. This whole process of new awkwardness leading to new ability is seen quite clearly in the very simple technique of interweaving, which I learned from a brilliant man by the name of Walter S. Campbell. Every copywriter should read Campbell's book, Writing Nonfiction, published by the Writer Inc. in 1961. In the next chapter, I'll list other books you should have, but this is certainly one of the important ones that you can probably master in a weekend. Campbell is talking about reporting and not copywriting, but the structural principles are the same. He says that even in the most factual reporting, no sentence can be effective if it contains only the facts alone. It must also contain emotion, evaluation, and impact, if those facts are to be given meaning and importance to the reader. The same is true for every sentence you write of copy. That sentence should contain not only promise, not only image, not only logic, but as much of all three as possible. Weave together your promise, your logic, your emotion, your image. Pack your sentences full of every one of them. Make them blend into each other till it's almost impossible to pull out the individual threads of the rich pattern of conviction and desire you're weaving. For example, go back to the fire injector ad in Chapter 12 and see how promise is interwoven in every sentence of the believability copy where the injectors are being contrasted with the old-fashioned plugs. In these two sentences, for instance. With ordinary spark plugs you are using or should be using premium gas, disadvantage, which costs from 4 to 8 cents more than ordinary gas, disadvantage, and despite this disadvantage, you're getting inefficient, disadvantage, wasteful gas consumption, disadvantage. In this first sentence, which is part of a logical sequence offered as proof of superiority through comparison of performance characteristics, the copywriter has managed to insert 6 disadvantage images for the reader to remember the next time he considers buying ordinary plugs. Now the copywriter goes on to his contrasting sentence about the injectors. With fire injectors, regular gas, promise, will give you up to 8 miles more per gallon, promise, up to 31 more horsepower, promise, plus easier starting, promise, in all weather, promise. 5 promises in the second sentence. The packing in of image upon image to build an overwhelming effect. Or, as an even more complicated example, involving the interweaving of almost every copy element in the book, let's look at this sentence. And most important, these experts have discovered that you do not have to be a handyman or a mechanic in order to coax this performance out of your set. Now, is this done consciously? Not at all. But the copywriter knew the principle of interweaving before and had it stored in his unconscious as one more tool to be used, intuitively in the effect he wanted, at the exact moment he needed it. Try it yourself. See how many different emotions you can pack into a single sentence, paragraph, or sequence. See how much richer and more powerful your copy becomes. How much more you can say in the same space. Sensitivity, how to give your reader what he demands step by step throughout the copy. Now, if you continue to pile promise upon promise, identification upon identification, documentation upon documentation, element upon element, where do you stop? Where does it become too much? Where does the reader become satiated or bored and want to go on to a new image or new promise or even the close? At what point are you starting to oversell? How do you catch yourself and switch off? We have already touched on this problem before in Chapter 11. I suggest that you reread that discussion now, even though we're going to expand on it at this point. Here you are relying on your own powers of empathy. You must be at the same time not only the writer of your ad, but its reader. You must anticipate that point in the copy flow, as it is transformed into a series of impressions in your reader's mind, where he is going to say, "I've read enough about this. Give me this instead," and then you must shift the direction of the copy to meet his new direction of interest. In other words, what we are talking about now is the overall structure of your ad, not a sentence or a paragraph or a sequence, but the architecture of the ad as a whole. Every ad has an architecture, as I'm sure you know. This is the overall pattern of the ad, including when and where and how many times you shift from one type of copy to another. It is the ability to recognize these shift points and to change when you encounter them from, say, promise copy to mechanism copy to documentation copy to promise copy again, that makes your ad stick together or fall apart. This is an almost impossible skill to communicate, since it relies so much on the feel of each individual situation. A copywriter's library. I've now given you what I've learned about writing copy. It has taken many years to learn it, 3 more to set it down to my own satisfaction. I hope it will help you in the only way that really counts, to do a better job and make a little more money. There are, of course, many men in this industry who know far more about these techniques and who can produce far better copy than I. My excuse for writing this course is that they don't seem to have included, at least to my present knowledge, many of the specific techniques which I've discussed with you here. Some of them have written books on the subject, great books, and I'd like to list them here for you. I think you should buy and read every one of them, and then thumb through them again every year or so, just to catch what you may have forgotten. Here they are. Indispensable, of course, is Julian Watkins's great anthology, The 100 Greatest Advertisements, Moore Publishing, 1949. Claude Hopkins wrote a great book, My Life in Advertising, Harper, 1927. Make them dig it up for you, and see if you can't get some of the old Hopkins ads. John E. Kennedy, not John F. Kennedy, wrote a little pamphlet many years ago called Intensive Advertising, which has just been republished by Printers Inc. You should definitely get it. It'll be the most profitable evening's reading you've ever done. J.K. Lasker, who worked with both these great writers, never wrote anything himself, but he did give a series of talks before his staff one week, and Printers Inc. has captured them. They're called The Lasker Story. Robert Collier's letter book is published by Prentice Hall. It's a gold mine. David Ogilvy wrote Confessions of an Advertising Man, which you can buy as a paperback, charming and wonderfully profitable. Rosser Reeves' very short book, Reality in Advertising, is published by Knopf, and must be read several times before you get everything out of it you should. Milton Bayau's book, Butting In, is marvelous in the first half, repetitive in the second. And don't forget Campbell's book, Writing Nonfiction, or those by Kappels, Young, Glim, and Bedell. Or the motivation research books by Dichter and Martineau, or the great book on layout, Visual Persuasion by Baker. Then there are the books on American society today, by Mills, Reisman, Fromm, Cardner, and all the rest. And the articles on the emerging trends in the media, and the media themselves, and of course your primary source, the ads themselves. Keep reading, keep analyzing, keep writing, keep looking for the new idea, the $1 million hidden somewhere in that typewriter of yours. Always shoot for the moon. It's one of the few real thrills left today. If you enjoyed this Breakthrough Advertising full course, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe for more direct response content.